Welcome back to another edition of the Pagcast. I'm your host, Michael Pagani, joined alongside my NHL analyst, Nolan Thode. Today we are starting something new. This segment is called Down to the Wire, where I bring Nolan Thode on to recap what happened within the week within the NHL. So Nolan, welcome on to the show again. Thank you again for taking my invitation.
No problem, Pags, man. It's always an honor to be on the podcast. One thing I wanted to get out of the way, though, even though we're talking about hockey here, I think both of us gotta appreciate the run that the Buffalo Bills are going on right now. That's a incredible feat, and hopefully we wish them luck in the AFC Championship against the Kansas City Chiefs.
And that thought occurred to me this weekend. We saw them play a defensively sound game. Their offense wasn't there. That could have been because of the wind. Obviously, the wind was affecting Justin Tucker, who hit two kicks off the upright. You can call it commentator jinx by Al Michaels and or Chris Collinsworth. However you want to look at it, they left a potential 6 points on the board there because of those two missed kicks. But I think Michelle Tafoyo, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, she reported that both coaches acknowledged that wind was a major factor within the game. So that's just a problem with this type of offense that the Bills have. They really asserted their pass offense first. Their first run was actually an Allen scramble, and that didn't come till late first quarter, or maybe even the late first half. I'm not too sure, but they just kept passing the ball. And Sal Capaccio, the Bills beat reporter, who just did an interview on Overdrive just about 20 minutes ago, he said that Dable really came out in this pass first offense because the Bills noted what the Ravens did to Derrick Henry and how they held him to 50 yards or less in that wild card game against the Titans. So, it's a huge run the Bills are going on. It sucks that, there's this whole pandemic going on and how we can't make it down there to even tailgate or to even, be with the fans, be with Bills Mafia, but we just got cheer from our living rooms, from our basements, potentially. And, that's that. Hopefully next year we can do something special.
Exactly. We just got to keep adjusting to the circumstances. I know for me, it's especially tough since the biggest Bills fan in my family, besides myself, is probably my brother, and he's living in Hamilton now, and we're in two different bubbles. So me not being able to watch the games with him is definitely something hard.
Let's start out here. The NHL is almost a week old here. And I thought that this was a more of a slow start rather than fans that we're used to. Teams are really slow out of the gate. It doesn't seem like everyone's 100%. I thought the overtime between the Montreal Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs was a great example of how teams were slow out of the gate. We saw Deneau on his breakaway and how he had no speed. Usually you would see players be faster than that. But I just thought that it's really weird how, like, obviously we had no preseason games. So as a fan, we hate preseason, but if you take it from the players' perspectives, now we understand just how important those preseason games are to them and how now we are seeing the effects without those preseason games.
No, yeah, for sure. I think a big factor to do with some of these slow starts that some of the teams are seeing is, the lack of training camp and preseason games. In a regular season, teams are with each other for months before the season, sort of just getting in preparation for game action. And they also get those preseason games, which doesn't perfectly simulate, a regular season game, but it gives them a good idea of the speed. And coming out of the gate, a lot of these teams are not used to the speed of a regular NHL game, especially, considering there was 24 teams in the bubble, but there's 7 teams who haven't played since last March. So for those 7 teams, they haven't seen game action in almost a full year. So it's definitely a big adjustment getting back onto the ice for them.
And I'm hoping that once players get used to, like, I think during this next week of NHL hockey, we're going to now see like the usual, we're going to get accustomed to, the regular hockey that we're used to, tough, speedy, gritty hockey that some teams play.
No, yeah, for sure. I think as the season goes along, we're going to begin to get back to the normal sort of speed and pace of the game. but definitely, you brought up the Leafs and Habs game yesterday. I'm not sure if you tuned in, but the Penguins Capitals game, not sure if it was a factor because it was a noon game. It was the middle of the day, but that overtime and shootout, it was rough to watch. There wasn't a lot of movement along the ice for either team.
I did tune into that game, in fact, and I got to agree with you. It didn't seem like any team, or both teams, I should say, wanted to come out and play. They were just basically playing keep away for 5 minutes, and there wasn't really, players weren't fast in the shootout. They came down slow and monotonous, and tried to fake, shoulder fake or whatever. And Jake Gensel ended up scoring the shootout winner there for the Pittsburgh Penguins. But I definitely agree. It's kind of an odd start to the season. Obviously, we're not used to this. It is a different year, but I just thought that there'd be something fast out of the gate. But hopefully, this next week we will be definitely accustomed to the fast start that we're used to.
Oh yeah, exactly. The opening night is such a highly anticipated thing, and once you get to it, the games are always exciting. These teams are hungry and eager, and we got the excitement and everything leading up to it, and we've been given some okay hockey, but definitely not as fast out of the gate as we're used to seeing.
How different has it been for you, or have you adjusted to fans not being in the stands?
I mean, in the bubble, fans not being in the stands, we definitely saw the impacts. There was no home ice advantage in the playoffs, clearly, as both of the hosting teams were out in the qualifying round. But I kind of got used to it from there, and also with NBA and such, and NFL not seeing fans in the stands. However, now it's a bit different because in the bubble, we were used to seeing them play either at Scotiabank Arena or Rogers Place, whereas now we're going all across the league. These teams are hosting games in their home arenas, and we're not used to seeing some of these teams playing without fans in a specific arena. So it's different for sure. And some teams, even like Florida, and I think Detroit has fans as well. I was seeing today, the minimal fans, it doesn't have too much of an impact. It's still as a sports fan, good for them that they're able to get there into the crowd. But I think a lot of us are just patiently waiting until full crowds can be back and impacting the game.
And I think that we saw with this World Juniors that, a lot of momentum, or even the Bills game, because the center, on Saturday, he was having trouble because of the crowd volume. 6,700 fans, feels like 67,000, as that's the tagline that's going around Bills Mafia right now. But yeah, like the center was having problems with the communication and the snap count. Because of just all the fans. And, that's crazy to me that such little fans can create so much momentum. And, I'm just hoping that we can get fans in old buildings, hopefully by the end of the season this year. And I think that'll be really fun to see.
Yeah, you just got to be optimistic that things are going to get better. And, fans have always known that, fans, the crowd noise has an impact on the game, but I don't think it's been put into, such a big perspective until now when we're seeing these teams play without fans. And to your point with the World Juniors, USA got up to a 2-0 lead, and, by themselves, Canada tried to claw back in, but you definitely would have thought that had that game been with fans in Edmonton, I think Canada would have had a lot better chance rallying, coming back, behind the crowd noise.
One team that has really surprised me so far has been the New Jersey Devils. They played 2 tight games against Boston. Both went to overtime. Boston, as we all know, are the President's Trophy winner last year. And I thought that New Jersey looks really good out of the game. If they can carry this momentum, I mean, in a sprint season like this with 56 games, who knows if they can make the playoffs?
Exactly. Like in a 56 game season, we're going to have 1 or 2 teams where, not a lot of people expected them to make the playoffs, but they did. And New Jersey, yes, their roster isn't solid. And within the last 2 years, they haven't had much success. But just 3 years ago, they made the playoffs backed by a Hart season by Taylor Hall. But you look at that roster and it wasn't, much better than it is now. And I think a big part of this New Jersey success is the youth throughout the lineup. I think, these are New Jersey's one of those teams where they didn't have much of a roster to begin the season with in terms of completeness. Whereas you look at like a Tampa or a Boston, for any rookie to come in and crack that lineup, it's going to be hard just because it's so set. But with New Jersey, there were so many spots up for grabs, and you see Ty Smith, the defenseman now, he's playing in his first season in the NHL. He looks like a really solid, sound defenseman. And not even just the rookies this year, but the young guys like Jack Hughes, they're stepping up and they're taking on the leadership roles that we expected them to see maybe a little bit earlier on.
And New Jersey is playing without Nico Hischier and Jesper Bratt, I should mention. And, they're doing phenomenal without those two forwards because, Hischier and Bratt, who's really underrated, Bratt, I got to say, that guy's, tremendous skill.
Both players.
Yeah, exactly. They don't get enough media attention. And, I think New Jersey's doing really well without them. And, the impact that Bratt and Hischier can add once they're healthy enough to return. I mean, if they can continue this momentum, like I've been saying, watch out for New Jersey.
Yeah. Well, going to extra time, 2 games in a row with Boston, Boston's without Pasternak, obviously that has an impact, but Boston without Pasternak is still a playoff team, in my opinion. So New Jersey definitely is, getting on some people's radar. And I think it's a tough market, New Jersey, unless you're just a really big superstar throughout the history of that team, outside of Martin Brodeur, Scott Stevens, Niedermeyer, not a lot of players get the recognition that they do deserve when they play in New Jersey, just because there's not a lot of national coverage towards them.
Now, although you mentioned that Boston, their forward core looks pretty deep, I would say, or maybe their bottom six is a bit weak, but I think the Boston defense is quite thin. It lacks depth outside of Charlie McAvoy, who's really the star, anchoring the back end there. I don't think that Boston has a tremendous defensive core, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you lose probably your 2 best defensemen in the offseason, Zdeno Chara is not the same defenseman he used to be, but, he was the captain, and defensively, he still was providing a lot for that team. It's a big presence to lose and to adjust to, as well as Torrey Krug. He was the main offensive player on that defense core. So now either, Charlie McAvoy, as you mentioned, or even Matt Grzelcyk is going to have to step up in an offensive way. So Boston's been gifted with good D-cores throughout the last couple of years, as well as good goaltending. But, this year, losing Chara and Krug, they're going to have to adjust, and it's going to be interesting to see how that defensive core shapes up throughout the season.
Chicago is now entering the rebuild phase, as mentioned in the letter stated this past offseason, I'm pretty sure, from Stan Bowman and their front office. And, they're without Doc and Taves, but obviously that letter was, addressed before all that happened. It seems to me right now that they're going to get a high draft pick, especially with the goaltending duo of Colin Delia and Malcolm Subban, or not. No. Malcolm Subban. Okay.
Malcolm Subban.
So, it seems crazy to me that, a team that dominated the early 2010s is now starting to fall off.
Well, yeah, I think with Chicago, outside of goaltending, which is a clear issue, last year, night 1, their tandem was Corey Crawford and Robin Lehner, which is a very solid tandem. And obviously, Corey Crawford went to New Jersey, and best of luck to him in his retirement. But, Colin Delia and Malcolm Subban, that's a big downgrade. So, when they're in that sort of position where they don't really have a starter, their defensive core, which is also lacking, is really going to shine those pieces on that defensive core. I remember being an Oilers fan, although the Blackhawks did beat the Oilers in that qualifying round, their defensive core was definitely the weak spot on that team, and they were saved time and time again by the play of Corey Crawford. So now I think that they don't have that, number 1 starter. They're really getting exposed. And like you mentioned with Taves, and Doc as well being not there, I think, for the last 10 years, I think they had their glory era throughout the early 2010s, and they've had some weaker seasons in the past couple of years, but they still sort of had some sort of identity when they had Taves on the ice. They still had a chance to win every game, but now without him, and obviously they shipped off Brandon Saad to Colorado for Zadorov in the offseason, I think they're just losing a lack of, they really just don't have much of an identity, and they're really it's really starting to show now.
Are you excited for the draft at all because of all the uncertainty with, all these prospects that are playing?
Well, I think it's such an interesting thing because last year, obviously, it wasn't a normal draft in the fact that these players, we didn't get to see them play a ton before the draft. However, they still had, at more than half of a season in their junior years. And with the OHL, I'm not sure about the WHL and QMJHL, but there hasn't been much action. So in terms of prospects from Canada, it's a really, really blurry area. As for people in Europe, I think this draft especially, we're going to see a lot of players from Europe maybe get a little more attention than usual, just because the Canadians, they're at such a disadvantage. They have to rely on everything they've proven up to this point for their draft ranking. So I think as a GM, this draft can be frightening because you're getting the least amount of scouting on a given player as you've ever been given before. But I think teams will have to adjust to that. And like I said, I think the players from Europe are at an advantage and could move up in draft boards because of this.
I think this draft, this 2021 draft, is going to be a lot hit or miss, right? Like you might see a guy that's taken at number 5, but then that guy could be a miss. But then we look back at number 20, and that guy's a hit. It's going to be a little spotty this year, and that's just because of the pandemic that we're going through. And hopefully, these prospects do pan out. You never want to wish failure on anyone, but it really is putting GMs and scouts at such a big disadvantage when only European leagues are currently the ones going. I know the WHL, all the CHL has postponed their games. Their leagues aren't starting for a while, so it really sucks right now for the Canadians because like you said, you got to prove everything that you've proved up to this point.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, it's just such a strange year, and I think hopefully, as we get closer to the draft, we get to see more and more of these prospects.
We got to talk about the Florida Panthers and how their games have been postponed, but really after their news about the games of after the news that their games were going to get postponed, it really turned sour when Keith Yandel was about to end his Ironman streak, but now he played yesterday, last night, and scored his 100th goal. Congrats to him, obviously, but it just seems like such a weird situation down there in Florida.
Yeah, the Meg Babcocks of this league, the league is starting to shift into a different phase, but I feel like Joel Quenneville is, one of those examples of those no nonsense sort of coaches. And I'm not too sure what was happening behind the scenes, but obviously there was an issue within the locker room with Keith Yandel, whether it just be, his lack of excitement in training camp. They thought that he wasn't, good enough to crack their top 6, which in my opinion is, probably not right, because I feel like that Florida top 6 is needing a guy like Keith Yandel. But it could just be Joel Quenneville's stubbornness. He's one of those coaches where, he just looks like a pretty scary dude and you don't want to mess with him. But obviously for the hockey fan, Keith Yandel's such an exciting personality, and he has been one of the best personalities in the league for the last, 10 or so years. And that's a lot. That's really good for hockey fans, since, the NHL is lax in, sort of personality. You look at the NBA and the NFL, these players, they have these brands and these personalities, and you see them all over. But with hockey players, there's not so much of that. So anytime a player has, a big personality like Keith Yandel, everyone sort of cheers for them to succeed. And I'm sure you as well as myself were cheering when he scored that goal last night, and he seemed to be very emotional when he did score that goal.
I just want to add on to your point there. I think the NHL does lack in marketing their star players. They need to do a better job of it, and they got to keep because I'm thinking of the Jake Voracek interview and how he completely demolished that reporter. Obviously, there's been some turmoil between the two for quite some time, but if they can get those interviews like rolling and rolling again, like you mentioned, a lot of people are now going to gravitate to these personalities, and that's how you kind of get more people involved within your league, in my opinion.
No, yeah, I think the NHL is just going to be forever searching for a way to make up for the lack of marketing that their players have. I think now, with the new age, guys like Matthews, they're in the GQ magazines, trying to make more of a brand for themselves than players in the past have. But the thing with hockey players is I feel like there's a lack of personality. you got the Evander Kanes, you got the Ryan Reeves, Tom Wilson's in the league. Those are going to bring the personality. However, just compared to the NBA and NFL, it's hard to market your players.
Ben Bishop and the Dallas Stars, Ben Bishop, we all know, is injured and is out right now. He's on injured reserve. And, the Stars are now going to rely heavily on Khudobin again, who really carried them the majority of the way in the bubble, if I'm not mistaken. And to be fair, with all their games postponed, I think they may be prone to a slow start like we've been seeing with most of the teams.
No, absolutely. I think a team that a lot of people are pointing at to take a pretty marginal step back this season is the Dallas Stars. And not so much to say that they're not going to make the finals as a step back, but I think, missing the playoffs is definitely in the realm of possibilities for them, considering, they won't have Ben Bishop for the first, at least first half of the season. I'm not too sure when he's due to be back, but it is in the tail end of the season. In addition to that, they're missing probably their most gifted offensive player in Tyler Seguin. He's out for the first couple months as well. So I think those two pieces are definitely big. And I think when you look at Khudobin, he had the great playoff run, and he's been a phenomenal backup. But he's going to be relied upon to get these starts in the regular season. And it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be a real test of how good of a player he is, because we've seen the Andrew Hammonds, we've seen Matt Murray won a cup as a rookie. We've seen goalies get hot at the right times, but it's going to be up to Anton Khudobin whether this team can stay competitive.
And I think Jake Onger brings up another question, and whether he can have sustainability within the net and kind of relieve Khudobin on those back-to-backs, or when they're playing, 3 games in 4 nights or whatever.
Yeah, I think with the young goalies, in 2017, I believe Dallas drafted Ottinger in the first round, and he hasn't been everything that they drafted him to be. But I think this opportunity for him is definitely exciting. I think Stars fans should be excited. Because you look at the Carter Hart, being a potential Vezina candidate this year. He's so young. So when you have a good young goalie come in, it's good. But we've also seen, instances where a goalie, you can just tell they're not ready for NHL action. You mentioned Ilya Sorokin when we were talking before about the Islanders, but he got lit up in his first start. I think he's a little more NHL ready than others. But a perfect example is Michael DiPietro. He was a good junior goalie, good goalie for Canada, but he got thrust into action, played a game for the Canucks either last year or 2 years ago, and he let in like 7 goals against the Sharks. So I think it's another instance where it's hit or miss in terms of these young goalies. They're either going to wow people, or they're just going to not be ready for NHL action. And I think there's a lot of question marks surrounding the Dallas tandem, and I hope they can step up.
Another fan base that should be excited is the Minnesota Wild. And, they got a Calder nominee, a legit Calder nominee, Kirill Kaprizov, who's, I guess, 5 years past his draft date, if I'm not mistaken. He's certainly on a hot streak right now. Obviously, it's like 3 games into the season, so take it with a grain of salt. But he had an OT winning goal in Los Angeles, and actually in one of the back-to-backs, and then he had an OT assist in the other back-to-back. So there's definitely some familiarity there with Kaprizov in the Minnesota Wild system, which is good. And they're playing him on the first line. He's playing power play line 1, so they're giving him a lot of opportunity to run with.
No, yeah, Kaprizov, he's just making a case for why the 2015 NHL draft class will probably go down as the best draft class of all time. He seems like a steal. I think he went in the 5th round or so. And that has a part to do with the fact that he had a KHL contract. Teams knew that he wasn't going to be able to play in the NHL until he was around this age. And I think, short term, that's not what you're looking for when you draft someone. But Minnesota, they were patient, and it seems as it's totally paid off, as, now he's coming in, 23 years old. He had experience in the KHL. He was above a point per game in the KHL last year. And there was a lot of hype surrounding him coming up to the season. I know I was on that hype train. I prioritized to get him in most of my fantasy hockey leagues. And I'm super happy with the outcome, as, he seems like a matured 23-year-old stepping into this action. And he seems as if he's ready, for this power play 1, ready for this first line opportunity in Minnesota. And, just for Minnesota Wild fans, they really haven't had that superstar, in maybe their entire history. And I think Kaprizov, is definitely making a case for a budding superstar in this league.
And I think that we should mention that he actually scored the gold medal winning goal for the Olympic of athletes from Russia in 2018 in Pyeongchang. So, there's obviously some history with him scoring big goals. We can kind of attribute that to the OT winning goal. Just something kind of fun to put in there.
No, yeah, that just adds to his resume, having scored that goal. Obviously, he probably wouldn't have cracked the roster had it been a normal Olympics, but he got that opportunity to play since Russia Russia wasn't allowed to have players from the NHL. I mean, no team was allowed to have players from the NHL. And Russia was expected to win that tournament since they had the advantage of the KHL. And, him being in 2018, he would have been 21 years old, scoring that goal definitely proves that he has that clutch mentality in him.
Marco Rossi is, their top draft pick this past draft. Do you think that we could potentially see Rossi and Kaprizov play together when Rossi does come back from his injury?
I think it's definitely an interesting thing to consider. Marco Rossi was one of the top prospects in this draft, and he sort of just fell into the Wild's lap. He was, some people thought he could go, top 3, top 5, but he ended up going to the Wild, and they have to be ecstatic about the fact that they got Marco Rossi, as he does fit that true center position, which they are lacking. You look at their team, and their first line center, centering Parise and Kaprizov, is Nick Bukestad. And, Bukestad, no knock to him, but he's not a number one center in this league. Other centers include, Nick Bonino, Marcus Johansson can play the center. But I think, Marco Rossi is definitely going to be given that opportunity considering how thin they are at center. And, if his performance is good enough, I think, they're going to put him with Kaprizov just because to get that chemistry built when the team is young and when those players are young. I think it could be an interesting thing to see.
One of the line combinations that I've been liking recently is that Dan Quinn decided to put Alexis Lafreniere alongside of Artemi Panarin. And, that really shows me that he has trust or trust and that he wants his rookie to succeed. Dan Quinn's putting his rookie Alexis Lafreniere in a position to succeed with Artemi Panarin, who, he had a great season last year, and hopefully Panarin and Lafreniere can build that chemistry and have another great season this season.
Yeah, I think, when the Rangers won the lottery, it was disappointing when one of the play-in won the lottery. You felt as if, the Penguins or the Oilers, one of these teams going to get Lafreniere. I think the Rangers wasn't a terrible option, but you look at them last season and how they handled Capo Kakko. He was very highly touted coming from Finland, and people thought he was going to be, potentially the Calder. And he just didn't really mesh well with Dan Quinn, and he didn't get really the minutes that, a true number 2 overall pick should be getting. And a lot of people, when Lafreniere went to the Rangers, thought, they're very deep at left wing. They had Panarin, they had Chris Kreider. So people thought, maybe the opportunity wasn't going to be there for Panarin or for Lafreniere either. But, it's already the second game of the season. And part of that might be the fact that they lost 4-0 in their first game. They had to make a big change. And I think putting Lafreniere with Panarin is definitely an interesting thing. And I think hockey fans should be excited because, we've already seen what Panarin and Zibanejad can do. Add another element into that, and the Rangers have a very exciting offense.
You touched on this a bit earlier with Ilya Sorokin and how he looks NHL ready, but, he did get torched, unfortunately. But, the thing is that he was rushed into that game after Semyon Varlamov took a shot to the collarbone area. I can tell you right now that, with Boston and New York playing as we speak, Varlamov is starting. But, I'm just hoping that Sorokin, hopefully he rebounds and has a better first game. Like, I wouldn't really count this as his first game because he was rushed in. He didn't really get the proper practice, because when you're in warmups before the game, usually the starting goalie takes, 80 to 90% of the shots from the team. Obviously Sorokin wasn't ready for that. So hopefully he can have a better game and, he can get some momentum in underneath him.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of expectations coming into the season because Sorokin, not only himself, was phenomenal in KHL play, which gets people excited. But within the last few years, you've seen Ilya Samsonov, who's now the starter in Washington, and you see Igor Shesterkin, who's now probably the starter in New York. You've seen these Russian goalies coming over after having some time in the KHL. You just draw those comparisons, and I think a lot of fans were super excited for Sorokin. Obviously, the start he didn't want, and I believe that as the season goes on, he's going to become a lot more comfortable with the NHL. I think for goalies, it's a little bit harder of a transition to go from the KHL to the NHL, especially against the Rangers team where we were talking, that high-powered offense. That's a team, where their defense isn't the greatest, so they have to rely on scoring goals. And I think, it was just unfortunate that Sorokin was put in that position. And I wish nothing but the best for him going forward.
Another goalie who has been torched as of late has been Frederik Andersen, which has caused some questions come the Leafs goalie tandem. Toronto hasn't really looked all that good to me. Andersen so far, he's played 2 games. He's allowed 9 goals, 5, I think to Montreal, 4 to Ottawa. Just sloppy play defensively. The Leafs are constantly getting outworked. In the first game against Ottawa, they got out hit, they got outshot, although they did play really good in the second game. They almost lost to Montreal, picking up the OTW against them. These Montreal and Ottawa are very inferior to Toronto. Like, Toronto should be wiping the floor with Montreal and Ottawa, in my opinion. But really, Toronto hasn't given me a vibe of a playoff team. So far, I have them out of the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, that's an extremely bold take for Toronto to be out of the playoffs. But obviously, I do believe that they'll rebound. And eventually, I think they'll be leading the North Division come to the end of the season. But that defense is definitely, draws some question marks. That was their biggest, that's been their biggest problem throughout the last couple of seasons. The offense has always been there. They've been in the top offenses in the league. However, their defense has been, so much of a handicap where they haven't been able to get past that first round hump. And I think for Frederik Andersen coming into this season, it's a different circumstance. He has 1 year left on his deal. There was a bit of noise in the offseason about him potentially getting moved. So, in terms of a goalie's confidence, that could have some impact. But I do think, Frederik Andersen's still a solid starter. And I think a lot of this is just to do with, the Leafs blue line. And I think these upgrades that they made in the offseason might not have been as good as Leafs Nation was pushing out there. You see in the first couple games, Zach Bogosian has not looked good whatsoever. And TJ Brody, I know I watched the first Montreal versus Toronto game, and TJ Brody looked practically invisible.
And another team that I mentioned there is the Ottawa Senators. I think a lot of people are underrating, these Senators because just of, what we see on paper. But I think they can hang with the big dogs after, I'm pretty sure it was like a 1-goal game against Toronto on the second back-to-back. I could be wrong. They played phenomenal in the first game. From on paper, they don't look like a good team at all. I'll be honest, but they have that great offseason acquisition in Evgeny Dadonov. They drafted Tim Stützle, who looks phenomenal so far. And they also have legit goaltending. They got Matt Murray from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and look at Pittsburgh. They're starting to falter now. And a lot of people put, the blame on Matt Murray, but now is it Tristan Jarry's fault? Is it Casey DeSmith's fault? A lot of Penguin fans are, trying to displace the blame on different people. Could Mike Sullivan get fired? A lot of questions there for Pittsburgh, but to stay on topic here with the Ottawa Senators, I really like their team. I really like how young they are. I think they got their mojo. They have their legs underneath them. This is a good team that I think a lot of people are not taking seriously.
Mm-hmm. Like I said before, there's going to be 1 or 2 teams every season that, kind of sneaks into the playoffs. And with only 7 teams in the North Division, more than half of them are going to make it. And the way this Ottawa's team's playing, I think they are young and exciting enough to, at least keep up with the other teams in the North Division. I think in terms of, if you had asked me 2 weeks ago, I didn't love the Senators roster, had some exciting pieces for sure. But I do think a very underrated move by Pierre Dorion was going out and getting Derek Stepan, bringing in that veteran leadership, someone who has playoff experience. Because I think, Ottawa, for the first time, maybe we were seeing a team, go through practically a complete rebuild. In terms of, very little pieces from their competitive team only a couple seasons ago remained. And I think they did lack that veteran leadership. And I think bringing in a guy like Derek Stepan is really, really big because, he adds leadership and takes a little bit of pressure off of, Brady Tkachuk and Thomas Chabot in their leadership roles, and they can focus more on, just playing their game and winning hockey games. But as you mentioned, Matt Murray, he had a lot of issues in Pittsburgh that resulted in him getting shipped out. And I think if he can play solid this season, I think the Senators can definitely make a push for sure.
One of the things about this season is one of the new things I should say is the helmet ads. Obviously, the NHL is losing billions while competing this season, but the owners, the general managers, the players all agreed on it because it would bring normalcy back into the fans' lives, and that was really important for them. But I'm pretty sure Gary Bettman appeared on Tim and Sid and had this great press conference or interview saying like, yeah, the NHL is losing billions, and they have to have sponsorships, they have to have ads just because it's how people keep their jobs. But the thing that I wasn't expecting was just the whole amount of it. I thought it was just going to be the small helmet ads and the division names, but I'm seeing ads on the glass, I'm seeing ads on the ice. This isn't a huge problem. Obviously it's it's, I guess, a change, right? To say, I wasn't ready for it, but I think this will be a thing until the NHL can operate in a positive income. A lot of people are worried about ads on the jerseys, though. But Bettman has said time and time again, even when Adidas finally took over as the jersey rights holders, fans were worried about ads on the jerseys there. And I still think to this day that we won't see it, although it's free money for owners. And, who wants to say no? Who would say no to free money? I just think that we won't see ads on jerseys. Bettman won't let that happen. There will be an outcry from the fans if they do happen. I don't think we'll see ads on the helmets other than this season and maybe the start of next season, depending on how things go with this whole coronavirus.
Yeah, I think aesthetically and visually, the amount of ads that we're seeing on these broadcasts, not only on the helmets, but as you mentioned, on the ice and on the glass, I think, for a fan visually, it might be a little much. It's a little, in your face. You're just getting hit with ads left and right. But I think as a hockey fan, especially as a, general sports fan, we've been so deprived in this pandemic that I think, we value just the fact that hockey's back, and we appreciate the fact that hockey is there. But also, as you said, in terms of the jerseys, I think we can appreciate the job that the NHL has done, because it seems that, they've put ads on pretty much everything that they can, except for the jerseys, because, a hockey jersey or a hockey sweater is more of a, like a sacred sort of thing. It's not so much you slap a Little Caesars ad on there for the Detroit Red Wings. It just, when there's so much history that goes behind team branding and such, I think, ads on the jerseys would cause for an outcry. In terms of the ads,
sorry, go ahead.
No. In terms of the ads on the helmet, I remember I had a discussion with my friend about it. Some of the teams, you look at the Capitals, their ad is Capital One, so it kind of fits within the team. But then you look at the Leafs, they have Scotiabank, and it looks fine on their home uniforms because it's white and it blends in with the blue. But on their away uniforms, it's the red Scotiabank logo on the Leafs helmet. And just when you think of the Leafs, you think of blue and white and nothing else. And when you throw that red into the mix, definitely it's going to upset some traditional sports fans.
Yeah, and just to add to your point there, the ads aren't that big on the helmets. They're very small, and if you're watching a game, you barely notice them until they focus on a player, right? So it's just a minor inconvenience, in my opinion, having the ads on the helmet. And I think that if that's the way to generate revenue and generate income, you just got to do it. It's kind of what we're left with in this pandemic.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, just, adjusting day by day to the changes that, sports are seeing. I think we value as fans, just seeing the game versus not seeing the game.
One thing that I thought we would do, which would be fun, is kind of do our predictions for the game. It could be, I just have the winning team, highlighted. I don't have really any score predictions. But, since we are recording on MLK Day, Martin Luther King Day, there are some games that are already ongoing and finished. So I thought that we would do the January 19th predictions. So those are the games for tomorrow. So I could go first. I have the New Jersey Devils beating the Rangers. I think that, with New Jersey's strong start, they're going to continue it and win against the Rangers. I think the Sabres are going to beat the Flyers, in my opinion. Obviously the loss to Zemgus Girgensons does impact that lineup. I just have a feeling that Taylor Hall and Eichler are finally going to click. They have Tage Thompson there to add size to that line. That's really the only reason I can think about that. I have the Panthers winning over the Blackhawks simply because the Blackhawks aren't good. The Capitals over the Penguins. I think that once that rivalry is going to be awesome to watch, but once now they got their first game underneath them, I think the Caps are going to be more gritty. They're going to beat down on the Pens, and they're going to take the win tomorrow. I have the Senators over the Jets. Like we mentioned, Ottawa is such a young team and such a fun team to watch. So I have them in their young core beating Winnipeg. I have the Columbus Blue Jackets over the Red Wings. Detroit, their goalie tandem is kind of weak in my opinion, having Jonathan Bernier assume the starting role. So I have a feeling that, the Blue Jackets and their top six will, overcome the Red Wings. I have the Carolina Hurricanes beating the Nashville Predators. I have a feeling that, the Carolina Hurricanes, they have, Andrei Svechnikov, Sebastian Aho, Nino Niederreiter. Those guys are going to help carry that offense to a victory tomorrow. And finally, we have the Colorado Avalanche versus the LA Kings. I have Colorado taking the W over the LA Kings. Colorado is such a fantastic team. They have great defense, great offense, and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be fun to look back at these predictions and see how we do. I think I'm going to have to disagree with you on the first one there, though. I'm going to go with the New York Rangers over the New Jersey Devils. I just believe, Lafreniere and Panarin, they got a little bit of game action under their belt. I think they'll bring it in against the Devils. And I think that, we could see a lot of goals being scored in that game. I think both teams, are interesting and have offensive pieces. I just feel like the Rangers as of now are a more complete team, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Devils do pull off the upset like you predicted. Moving on, I mean, I'll go with the Sabres as sort of my father's a Sabres fan. So is my brother, and that's my second favorite team, riding on the Buffalo train, I guess. The Flyers do look really good though. Out of the gate, I believe, Carter Hart's, like I said before, I think he's a Vezina candidate, and their offense has been playing well. But they did lose Sean Couturier, and I think that lack of, his presence, will be felt. And I think Buffalo can take advantage of that Flyers team. I think the Panthers will beat the Blackhawks as well. We saw last night just the Blackhawks don't look really much like an NHL team, and I think they're in for a very long and rough season. Bobrovsky also will be getting the start tomorrow night, I believe. He's got a lot to prove this season, so I'll go with him in that one. I think the Senators, I'll go with the upset as well. I don't know how much of an upset it is, but I think the Jets, they're playing tonight. They're playing the Leafs, so with Hellebuck. So I think Hellebuck might get pounded tonight, and in a back-to-back, they might be forced to go with their backup, Laurent Brossoit, and I think that might prove to be a disadvantage against the Senators. I think the Penguins, they'll lose. I think the Capitals will win. That's a sort of team where, it's a flip of a coin who's going to win that game. All you know is it's just going to be very entertaining. And I think the Capitals, they could have won that game yesterday, and I think, they'll win it this time around. For the Blue Jackets and Red Wings, they played today. The Blue Jackets won. It was closer than a lot anticipated, just because the Red Wings are still sort of in the joke era of their team. But Bobby Ryan's been playing well. But I think I got to go with the Blue Jackets, even though they do have a bit of drama going on within their locker room. I think I'm not too sure who the starter was today, but with Korpisalo and Merzlikins, you're rolling out a good goalie no matter what. And I believe that the Red Wings just won't have enough offensive firepower to beat them. I'll go with the Hurricanes as well over the Predators. I think the Hurricanes are, a good contender this season. I think, especially in that division, they could have a phenomenal regular season. They lost to the Red Wings the other day, which came to me as a bit of a surprise, but I do think they'll rebound. The Predators have looked, UC Saros has looked phenomenal through 2 games. I believe that's his role now. I think Pecorino we're going to see him just be the backup this season, but I still have the Hurricanes taking that. And then, I think the easiest pick of the entire night is probably the Avalanche over the Kings. I think the Kings are just in a transition period. The Blackhawks have gone through it. The Kings have been going through it for the last couple of years, just the post contending era where, the team is competitive for so many years, but they do sacrifice a lot of their future. I think the Kings have done a good job building for the future, but I just believe it's not there. And the Colorado Avalanche is probably one of the best rosters top to bottom in the NHL. So I'll go with them in that game.
Well, I'd like to thank my Pagcast analyst, Nolan Thode, for joining me on, this first segment of Down to the Wire. Thank you again, Nolan, for taking the invitation.
No problem, Pags. It's always a pleasure. And I hope this season proves to be an entertaining and memorable one for the NHL.